The suit was Tom Ford. Charcoal gray, peak lapel, the kind of fabric that whispered money before you even touched it. Mirabelle knew every piece in this closet by now, the Brioni, the kitten, the custom Zegna pieces that arrived in garment bags carried by men who never smiled. 6 months of steaming, brushing, organizing, and rotating wardrobes had given her an education in menswear that no fashion school could replicate. She could identify a $12,000 jacket by the weight of its canvas alone. But this particular suit wasn't hanging in its designated spot. It had been draped over the leather armchair in Park Young-min's private study like an afterthought, not sent to the dry cleaner, not hung on the mahogany valet stand, just left there, fabric pooling slightly against the cognac-colored leather, as though the man who wore it had taken it off mid-thought and never looked back. Mirabelle picked it up with both hands, feeling the familiar weight of quality wool beneath her fingers. She carried it through the connecting doorway into the walk-in closet, a room larger than her entire apartment, lined floor to ceiling with suits, shirts in every shade of white and blue, shoes arranged on angled shelves like museum pieces. The closet smelled like sandalwood and cedar, and there was always a stillness here that felt almost sacred, like entering a cathedral built for a man who worshipped precision instead of God. She reached into the breast pocket the way she always did before steaming, a habit, a professional reflex. She'd found forgotten cufflinks, business cards, a SIM card once, small artifacts of a life she had no business examining. She always placed them in the leather tray on the island without looking twice. Her fingertips brushed paper. She pulled it out, a single sheet, folded twice, no envelope. The paper was heavy, the cotton blend stationary from the desk in his study. She recognized the faint watermark. She should have placed it in the tray. She should have set it aside without a glance and gone about her afternoon. But the paper had come unfolded slightly in her hand, and her eyes caught a word before her discipline could stop them. Her name. Mirabelle, I don't know how to say this to your face, so I'm writing it here where no one will find it, especially not you. Her hands went still. The closet went silent around her, the ambient hum of the estate's climate control system suddenly loud in her ears. She looked at the handwriting. She knew it. She had seen it dozens of times on contracts left on his desk, on notes to Seojun, on margin annotations in architectural blueprints, sharp, precise strokes, every letter deliberate, no wasted ink. The handwriting of a man who treated even a pen like a tool of control. She read the next lines. Every morning when you sing in the East Wing, you don't know I'm listening. You don't know I rearranged my entire schedule so my coffee is in the study at that hour. You don't know that your voice is the only thing in this house that makes it feel like something other than a prison. Mirabelle's pulse was a drum in her throat. She felt heat climb her neck and bloom across her cheeks. She should stop reading. She knew she should stop reading. But her eyes were already pulling the next words off the page with a hunger that bypassed every rule she had ever set for herself about this job, this house, this man. I have no right to feel this way about you. You work for me. You'd probably laugh, or worse, you'd leave. And I think that would be the one thing I couldn't negotiate my way out of losing. The letter wasn't signed. It didn't need to be. She stood there in the closet, surrounded by 200 suits that collectively cost more than she would earn in a decade, holding a love letter from Park Young-min, the man the entire city called untouchable. The man who had built a $2.3 billion empire in luxury, real estate, and private security before turning 30. The man who had never, in 6 months of her employment, said more than 12 words to her at a time. The man whose idea of warmth was a single nod of acknowledgement when she set his pressed shirts in the correct rotation. And he was in love with her. The thought was so absurd that a sound escaped her lips, not quite a laugh, not quite a gasp, something between disbelief and a feeling she couldn't name. She read the letter again, then a third time, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something that made more sense, as if Mirabelle might become some other name, as if your voice might mean something other than what it meant. It didn't. Every word held steady. Every sentence pointed at her like a compass finding north. Footsteps. She heard them in the hallway beyond the study, heavy, deliberate, unhurried. She knew that walk the way animals know the sound of approaching weather, not because she studied it, but because her body had learned, over 6 months, to register his presence before her mind caught up. He walked like a man who had never once been unsure of where he was going. She should put the letter back. She should fold it, slide it into the pocket, hang the suit, and be standing at the steamer looking busy by the time he arrived. She had approximately 8 seconds. She didn't move. Young Min appeared in the doorway of the closet. He was in a black crewneck and dark trousers, his hair pushed back, his sleeves rolled to the forearm. He looked like he'd come from his home office. There was still the ghost of concentration on his face, the slight tension between his brows that meant numbers, deals, leverage. His eyes swept the closet the way they always did, scanning, cataloging. And then they landed on the letter in her hands. For the first time since Mirabel had known him, the most composed man in Arizona looked like someone had pulled the ground out from under him. It was subtle. Another person might have missed it, but Mirabel had spent 6 months studying the margins of this man's expressions, the way his jaw shifted when he was displeased, the way his eyes narrowed a fraction when something interested him, the way stillness settled over his body when he was calculating. She had learned his face the way she'd learned the closet, by proximity, by repetition, by the quiet act of paying attention when she told herself she wasn't. What she saw now was none of those things. What she saw was fear. It passed across his features like a cloud crossing the sun, fast, total, and then gone, replaced by the steel mask he wore for the rest of the world. But she had seen it. She would not forget it. Neither of them spoke. The closet held them in its expensive silence, and the letter trembled almost imperceptibly in her fingers. Young Min crossed the closet in 2 strides. His hand extended, not aggressive, not snatching, but deliberate, palm up, the way a man reaches for something he considers already his. "That's nothing," he said. His voice was level, almost bored, almost convincing. "A draft for someone else, give it here." Mirabel looked at the letter, then back at him. He was close now, close enough that she could smell the faint trace of his cologne, something dark and woody, not sweet, and see the tight line of his jaw working beneath the surface calm. "You rearranged your schedule to hear me sing?" she asked. The question left her mouth before she could weigh it, measure it, decide if it was professional or appropriate or wise. It simply came out, quiet and direct, the way her mother had always spoken, no performance, no angles, just the honest center of a thought. Young Min didn't answer. His hand stayed extended. His eyes held hers for 1 second, 2, 3, and then something in them shuddered, like a door closing at the end of a hallway. He took the letter from her fingers with practiced ease, folded it, and slid it into his back pocket. "Take the rest of the day off," he said. His voice was calm, but there was a crack in it she'd never heard before, a fracture line running through bedrock. "Full pay, I'll see you tomorrow." He turned and walked out of the closet without looking back. Mirabel stood there for a long moment after he left. Then she collected her things, walked through the estate's side entrance, climbed into her 11-year-old Honda Civic, and drove the 37 minutes back to her apartment on the east side of Scottsdale. She sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes with the engine off, and the windows cracked, desert heat seeping in like a slow tide, and replayed every interaction she had ever had with Park Young-min. 6 months earlier, Mirabel Adkins had been 2 weeks from eviction. Her previous employer, a retired tech executive, and his wife who lived in a sprawling Sedona compound, had relocated to Portugal without much warning. They'd given her a generous severance and a glowing reference letter. But generosity runs out fast when rent in Scottsdale is $1,400 a month for a studio apartment, and your savings account has the structural integrity of wet paper. Tanya had called from Houston 3 times that week. Her older sister had opinions the way thunderstorms had rain, relentlessly, with force, and whether you wanted them or not. "Come home, Myra. There's nothing for you in Arizona. You can stay with me until you find something. Houston has hospitals, has hotels, has houses that need cleaning. You don't have to prove anything out there by yourself." But Mirabel had seen a listing on an exclusive domestic staffing website. Private housekeeper, luxury estate, Scottsdale, AZ. Live-out position. Compensation, $7,200 month plus benefits. Requirements, impeccable discretion, 5 years minimum experience in high-net-worth households, no criminal record, no social media presence, willingness to sign a comprehensive NDA. The pay was almost double what she'd been making. She applied, submitted to a background check that felt more thorough than a federal security clearance, and was invited to interview at the estate. Her first sight of the property had silenced her. It rose from the desert landscape like something that had always been there, a modernist fortress of glass, stone, and steel, cantilevered against the McDowell Mountains, its lines so clean they looked like they'd been drawn by a machine that had never made a mistake. The driveway alone was a quarter-mile of polished aggregate, lined with desert willows and agave plants arranged with the precision of a chess opening. Kwon Seo-jun had met her at the door. He was Korean-American, mid-30s, built like a man who considered his body a professional instrument. His handshake was brief and dry. His tour of the estate was efficient. His list of rules was explicit. Mr. Park values silence and privacy above all else, Seo-jun had told her, his voice flat as a closed door. You do not engage him in conversation unless he initiates. You do not ask about his business, his schedule, or his personal life. You do not take photographs inside the property. You do not discuss anything you see or hear in this house with anyone outside of it. If any member of the press contacts you for any reason, you refer them to the company's communications office, and you notify me immediately. Is all of this clear? It was clear. Mirabelle signed the NDA, received her access codes, and began the following Monday. She was perfect at the job. She had always been perfect at the job. This was her gift, and on darker days, her cage, the ability to move through wealthy people's lives like a ghost, maintaining the beauty of their world without leaving a fingerprint of her own. She organized closets with architectural precision. She steamed garments with the care of a museum conservator. She polished shoes until they reflected the ceiling. She anticipated needs before they became requests. She was invisible, and she was excellent. But she sang. She couldn't help it. It was as involuntary as breathing, this humming, this soft melodic murmur that accompanied her hands while they worked. In the East Wing in the mornings, while she dusted the shelves and polished the marble, she let her voice drift, gospel songs her mother had loved, old Motown standards, Adele ballads that felt like weather systems, SZA tracks that settled into the silence of the house like smoke. She never sang loudly. She never performed. She simply let the music leak out of her, a soundtrack to solitude, a habit born from years of working alone in quiet rooms. She didn't think anyone heard her. Back in the present, sitting in her car in the parking lot, Mirabelle pressed her forehead against the steering wheel. She thought about the peonies. 3 weeks ago, a fresh arrangement had appeared on the counter near the East Wing entrance, lush pink peonies in a clear glass vase. She hadn't thought about it at the time. The estate always had fresh flowers, but she'd mentioned to the chef, Marco, in passing, that peonies were her favorite, a throwaway comment during a brief conversation about his daughter's wedding plans. She'd said it once, casually, and forgotten about it. The peonies had appeared the next day, and every week since. She thought about the thermostat. The East Wing was always set to 72 degrees. Exactly. She'd mentioned once, early on, to no one in particular, maybe to Seo-jun, maybe just out loud to herself, that 72 was her perfect temperature. The kind of offhand comment that evaporates the moment it's spoken. But someone had heard it. Someone had remembered. Someone had quietly, invisibly, adjusted the world around her to make it 2 degrees more comfortable. Small gestures, invisible gestures. The gestures of a man who was paying ferocious attention while pretending to look the other way. The next morning, Mirabelle arrived at the estate at her usual time. She badged in through the side entrance, changed into her work shoes, and began her routine. She did not deviate. She did not hesitate. She moved through the house with the same quiet efficiency she always had, and if her hands trembled slightly when she passed the door to his study, no one was there to notice. Youngmin avoided her completely. She heard his voice on phone calls behind closed doors, rapid, authoritative, switching between English and Korean with the fluidity of a man who thought in both languages simultaneously. She heard his car pull out of the garage at 10. She heard it return at 4. When he came back, he went straight to the West Wing and did not emerge. The estate felt enormous around her, bigger than before, as if the letter had expanded the space between them by making her aware of how much space there was. That evening, as Mirabel was about to leave, she found a note on the kitchen counter where she signed out each day. It was written on the same cotton blend stationery, the same sharp handwriting. "I'm sorry if I made you uncomfortable. It won't happen again. You don't have to worry about your position here." Mirabel read the note 3 times. She waited for relief. The reassurance that her job was safe, that the awkwardness would pass, that they would return to the clean, professional distance that had governed the past 6 months. The relief didn't come. What came instead was disappointment. It arrived like a guest she hadn't invited, unwelcome, undeniable, settling into the center of her chest with a weight that surprised her. Because some part of her, a part she had not acknowledged until this exact moment, standing in the kitchen of a billionaire's estate with a note in her hand, some part of her didn't want him to take it back. She folded the note, put it in her pocket, and drove home in silence. 3 days of professional distance. 3 days of nods without eye contact, of schedules arranged so they never occupied the same room, of a house that held 2 people who were acutely aware of each other while pretending the opposite. The estate ran like a Swiss watch. Nothing was out of place. Everything was pristine. But the air had changed. Every accidental moment of proximity, passing in a hallway, reaching for the same door handle, the sound of his footsteps approaching a room she was about to leave, carried a charge that Mirabel felt in the base of her spine. She caught herself listening for him the way she imagined he had been listening for her. She caught herself wondering if the peonies would still appear. They did. Fresh every Monday. On Thursday evening, Mirabel stayed late to finish reorganizing the library in the East Wing. A shipment of rare books had arrived, first editions that needed to be cataloged and shelved with archival care. By the time she finished, it was nearly 9 o'clock. The estate was silent. Youngmin was at a dinner in Phoenix. Seo-jun had gone with him. The night staff, a single security guard monitoring the gate, was in the guardhouse at the end of the drive. She was alone. She walked through the living room on her way out and stopped. The grand piano sat in the corner by the floor-to-ceiling windows, a Steinway Model D, 9 feet of polished ebony that she had dusted 100 times but never touched beyond that. It sat in a pool of moonlight that came through the glass, the desert landscape silvered and vast beyond the window. She sat down on the bench. She hadn't played in years, not since the music program in Dallas that she dropped out of at 21 when her mother's diagnosis turned their lives into a series of hospital rooms and insurance phone calls. She'd been studying vocal performance. She'd been good. Her professors had told her she was exceptional, but exceptional doesn't pay for chemotherapy, and dreams have a way of going quiet when someone you love is dying. Her fingers found the keys. She played a simple chord progression, something she'd written years ago, a melody that had lived in her body like a second heartbeat, never performed, never recorded, never shared. And then she sang. Not humming, not the soft, under-the-breath murmur she allowed herself during work hours. She sang full voice. The sound filled the living room, bounced off the stone walls, spiraled up to the vaulted ceiling. It was a song about her mother, about watching someone disappear slowly, cell by cell, smile by smile, about sitting beside a hospital bed and singing because it was the only thing she could offer that the doctors couldn't, about the silence after. She sang about wanting to be seen, not admired, not evaluated, not appraised, but truly seen. The way you see a person when you stop looking at what they do and start looking at who they are. Her voice cracked on the bridge, the way it always did with this song, because the bridge was about the last morning, and some grief doesn't smooth out with time, it just becomes a different texture of rough. She didn't know about the security cameras. Seo-jun had been testing a new system all week, upgraded feeds, higher resolution, expanded coverage. The living room camera was active. Its feed was streaming to a tablet in Youngmin's home office. Youngmin had come home early from dinner. He was in his office, reviewing documents, when the sound reached him through the device. He set down his pen. He listened. Then he stood, walked to the mezzanine that overlooked the living room, and stood in the shadows above her. He watched her sing the way a man watches something he knows he'll remember for the rest of his life. He didn't move. He didn't announce himself. He took out his phone and pressed record, not to share, not to exploit, just to keep. A private act of devotion from a man who didn't know how to be devoted in any language he'd been taught. The song ended. Mirabelle sat at the piano for a long moment, her hands in her lap, her eyes closed. Then she stood, smoothed her shirt, and left through the side entrance without knowing she'd had an audience. The clip surfaced 2 days later. Rico, the assistant chef, was 24, ambitious in the way that social media rewards, and managed a meme page with 400,000 followers. He'd overheard Mirabelle singing through the kitchen intercom days earlier. A different occasion, a different song, but the same voice, and had held his phone up to the speaker to capture 45 seconds of audio. He posted it to TikTok with the caption, "Asterisk, the private maid at a billionaire's estate sings like this." 2 million views in 18 hours. The comments section became a cathedral of disbelief and demand. Who is this woman? Drop her name immediately. This voice is criminal. She's working as a maid. Someone sign her right now. Music blogs picked it up. A producer from a label in Beverly Hills DM'd Rico within hours asking for contact information. Twitter threads dissected the audio quality, confirming it was raw and unproduced, which only amplified the frenzy. Someone ran the audio through vocal analysis software and posted the results. Her range, her control, her tone, clinical confirmation of what anyone with ears already knew. Mirabelle found out when Tanya called from Houston, voice tight with confusion and alarm. "Myra, why is your voice on the internet? There's a TikTok with 2 million views and people in the comments are saying you're a maid in some billionaire's house. What is happening?" Mirabelle's stomach dropped. She found the clip. She listened to her own voice coming out of her phone speakers, stripped of context, turned into content, and felt a violation so intimate it took her breath away. She confronted Rico in the estate's kitchen. He was apologetic, earnest, stumbling over his words. "I just thought your voice, Mirabelle, it's insane. The world needed to hear you. I didn't mean to." "You recorded me without my permission," she said, her voice steady even as her hands shook. "In someone else's home, while I was working." Before Rico could respond, Young Min walked into the kitchen. He'd already seen the clip. He'd already made his decision. "Rico," he said. His voice was quiet. There was no anger in it, which somehow made it worse. "You recorded a member of my household without her consent and published it publicly. Pack your things. Seo-jun will escort you out." Rico opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Mirabelle, looked at Young Min, and understood that no appeal existed in this courtroom. He left within the hour. Mirabelle stood in the kitchen after Rico was gone, her arms crossed, staring at the counter. Young Min was still there. The silence between them was not the charged, careful silence of the past week. It was something else, something that felt, improbably, like solidarity. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Yes," he said, "I did." He left the kitchen. Mirabelle stood there for a long time, feeling the weight of what had just happened. Not just the firing, the reflex, the speed, the absolute certainty with which he had chosen to protect her without being asked. But the viral clip had cracked open a door that couldn't be closed. Mirabelle's identity was being hunted across the internet with the tenacity of people who treat other people's lives like puzzles to solve. And in Atherton, California, a woman named Victoria Colton watched the clip on her phone, read the caption, and felt something cold and calculating ignite behind her eyes. The white Range Rover pulled into the estate's circular drive on a Tuesday afternoon, and Victoria Colton stepped out of it the way a woman steps onto a stage, aware of the lighting, the angles, and every eye that might be watching. She was stunning in the way that money and discipline produce. Tall, angular, her dark hair blown out to a high gloss, wearing a cream pantsuit that probably cost more than Mirabelle's car. Her smile, when Seo-jun met her at the door with visible reluctance, was warm and practiced, The kind of smile that made you feel welcomed and warned simultaneously. "Seo-jun," she said, as though they were old friends and not two people who had always regarded each other with mutual suspicion. "I'm in town for the Pinnacle Development Conference. I thought I'd stop by and see the place. It's been too long." She walked into the estate like she still owned it. Mirabelle was arranging fresh linens in the second-floor hallway when she heard the voice. She looked over the railing and saw Victoria in the foyer below, already moving through the space with proprietary ease, trailing her fingers along surfaces, commenting on new artwork, asking about renovations. Young Min appeared 20 minutes later. His greeting was civil, measured. He offered her coffee. They sat in the formal living room, and their conversation was the kind of performance that looks like ease but is actually a chess match conducted in pleasantries. Victoria stayed for dinner. She insisted gracefully in a way that made refusal seem ungracious. Mirabelle served. She moved through the dining room with her usual professionalism, setting plates, refilling water glasses, clearing courses. She kept her face neutral, her movements efficient. But she felt Victoria watching her. Not openly, Victoria was far too polished for that. It was a peripheral assessment, a series of glances assembled into a complete picture. Mirabelle could feel herself being measured, categorized, evaluated for threat level. Over dessert, Victoria turned a comment like a knife. "Young men always did appreciate people with hidden talents," she said, her voice light as champagne. "He collects them, really. Finds something extraordinary in the most unexpected places. It's one of his gifts." She looked directly at Mirabelle as she set down the coffee. "Wouldn't you say?" The words were shaped like a compliment and weighted like a warning. "Mr. Park has excellent taste in everything I've observed," Mirabelle replied evenly, setting down the cream without a tremor. Victoria smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. After dinner, Mirabelle was carrying dishes through the service corridor when Victoria appeared beside her like a silk-wrapped apparition. "Can I talk to you for a moment?" Victoria asked, her voice warm, conspiratorial, sisterly. "Woman to woman." Mirabelle set the dishes on the counter and faced her. Victoria spoke with the gentle concern of someone delivering bad news to a child. She told Mirabelle that young Min had a pattern, that he became fascinated with people, employees, artists, charity cases, that he fixated with intensity and then moved on once the novelty faded. She said she'd seen it happen 3 times during their engagement. "Not affairs," she clarified quickly. "More like obsessions, intellectual, emotional. They burn bright and then they're over." She placed a manicured hand on Mirabelle's arm. "I'm not trying to be cruel, sweetheart. I'm telling you this because I've been where you are, caught in his attention. It feels extraordinary, but it's not permanent, and I don't want to see you get hurt when it ends." Mirabelle looked at the hand on her arm, then at Victoria's face. She studied it the way she'd learned to study surfaces in her work, looking for what was underneath. "Thank you for your concern," Mirabelle said. "I appreciate it." She picked up the dishes and walked away. But that night in her apartment, sitting on the edge of her bed in the dark, the words worked on her like slow poison. "He collects them. It's not permanent. He moves on." Was she a fascination? A novelty? Was the letter the whim of a powerful man who mistook boredom for feeling? She didn't want to believe it. But doubt is a patient predator, and Victoria had placed it at her door with surgical precision. The truth about the broken engagement lived in a file that Seo-jun kept on his encrypted phone and had never shared with anyone. Young Min had ended things with Victoria 18 months ago, 3 weeks before their planned engagement party. He had discovered, through a forensic audit triggered by an anomaly in a joint investment account, that Victoria had been systematically leveraging the Park family name, business contacts, and proprietary deal flow to benefit her father's venture capital fund. She had accessed young Min's private correspondence, shared confidential term sheets, and used their relationship as a Trojan horse to open doors that would have remained closed to the Colton family otherwise. When young Min confronted her, she hadn't denied it. She'd reframed it. "I was building bridges between our families," she'd said, without a trace of shame. "That's what partners do." Young Min had looked at her for a long moment. Then he'd taken the engagement ring from the table between them, placed it in its box, and said, "Partners don't use each other. We're done." He never spoke about it publicly. He never explained. The society columns speculated about irreconcilable differences and busy schedules. Victoria maintained the narrative that the split was mutual and amicable. But she had never accepted it. In her mind, the engagement wasn't over. It was paused. And now, watching a housekeeper occupy a space in Young Min's attention that Victoria considered rightfully hers, the pause was becoming unbearable. The launch event for Park Pinnacle Residences, a $400 million luxury residential tower in Paradise Valley, transformed the estate into something from a film. Landscape lighting turned the desert gardens into a luminous wonderland. A jazz quartet played on the terrace. Waitstaff in black circulated with champagne and architectural canapes. The guest list was a catalog of Arizona's wealthiest residents, visiting investors from Seoul, and a carefully curated selection of media. Mirabel coordinated behind the scenes, managing the flow of catering deliveries, directing the cleaning rotation, ensuring the house maintained its pristine composure under the siege of 100 guests. She wore her usual work attire, but she'd pressed it with extra care, and her locks were pulled back in a way that showed the elegant line of her neck. She was in the service corridor checking her clipboard when a man approached her. Tall, black, mid-40s, wearing a suit that fit like it had been sewn onto his body that morning. His smile was confident but not predatory. He extended a hand. "Gavin Pryor," he said, "Executive VP at Monarch Records." Mirabel shook his hand, already knowing where this was going. "I've been trying to find you for 2 weeks," Gavin said. "That clip, the one from TikTok, I've played it for my entire A&R team. Every single one of them said the same thing." He leaned in slightly. "Once-in-a-generation tone, I'm not exaggerating." He told her he wanted to fly her to Los Angeles. A studio session, a development deal, not a contract, not yet an exploration. A chance to see what she could do in a proper studio with proper production. "I know this is unexpected," he said. "Take my card, think about it. But please don't take too long. Voices like yours don't stay hidden forever." He pressed a matte black business card into her hand and disappeared back into the crowd. Mirabel stood in the corridor holding the card. Her hands were shaking and she couldn't make them stop. This was the dream. The one she'd buried 6 years ago in a hospital room in Dallas, watching her mother's monitors beep their slow countdown, knowing that the music program's scholarship and the performance showcase and the future she'd been building note by note had become a luxury she could no longer afford. She'd packed that dream into a box and put it somewhere dark and deep, and she'd never told anyone about it, not even Tanya. And now it was standing in front of her in a tailored suit, offering her a card. She turned to leave the corridor and walked directly into Young Min's chest. He steadied her with one hand on her elbow. His eyes went from her face to the business card in her hand to the direction Gavin Pryor had disappeared, and something shifted in his expression. Not anger, not jealousy exactly, something more complex. Something that looked like a man watching a door open and not knowing if it was opening toward him or away. "Sorry," Mirabel said, stepping back. "Are you all right?" he asked. His voice was careful. "Fine, just busy." He looked at her a moment longer than necessary, then nodded and walked away. The guests left by midnight. The caterers packed up. The jazz quartet loaded their van. The estate returned to its usual cathedral silence, except for Mirabel, who was on the terrace collecting abandoned champagne flutes. The desert sky was impossibly wide above her, salted with stars, the kind of sky that makes buildings and empires feel temporary. The air had cooled to that perfect temperature where the heat of the day becomes a memory you can still feel on your skin. Young Min appeared on the terrace. He'd removed his jacket. His sleeves were rolled. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with the party. He didn't mention the letter. He didn't mention Gavin Pryor. He stood beside her at the railing, looking out at the desert, and asked a question that no one had ever asked her. "The song you sang in the living room that night, the one you wrote, what was it about?" Mirabel set down the champagne flute she was holding. She looked at him. He was staring at the horizon, giving her the space to answer or not, and she understood in that moment that this was how he loved, by creating openings and then waiting. She told him. She told him about her mother, about the diagnosis, ovarian cancer, stage 3, diagnosed when Mirabel was 21 and halfway through a vocal performance scholarship at a conservatory in Dallas, about dropping out, about moving home, about the 2 years of treatment, the brief remission, the relapse that came like a second earthquake before the rubble of the first one had been cleared. About singing at her mother's bedside, because it was the one thing that still made her smile, even at the end. About the silence after her mother died, a silence so total that Mirabel's voice felt like a wound, something that reminded her of everything she'd lost. The song is about wanting to be heard, she said. Not by everyone, by one person who's really listening. Young Min was quiet for a long time. The desert wind moved between them, carrying the smell of sage and cooling stone. Then he spoke. He told her about his father, Park Sung-ho, who had come to the United States from Busan at 22 with an engineering degree, $800, and a conviction that hard work was a kind of prayer. Who had built the family's first real estate holding, a strip mall in Koreatown, by working 20-hour days for 3 years. Who had expanded, strategized, leveraged, and grown the business into an empire that spanned luxury developments in every major market west of the Mississippi. And who had died of a heart attack in his office at 59, alone, at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday night, while Young Min was in a meeting in another building and didn't find out until the security guard called. He built this house, Young Min said, looking back at the estate. Every room, every specification. He picked the stone, the glass, the angles, and he spent maybe 40 nights in it before he died. A pause. It's a monument, that's all it's ever been. A monument to a man who never stopped working long enough to live in the thing he built. He looked at her. Your singing is the first time this house has felt alive. They didn't kiss. They didn't touch. They stood on the terrace under a sky that was older than everything either of them had ever lost, and they saw each other. Not the roles, not the employer and the employee, not the mogul and the maid, but the actual people underneath. The grief-shaped, dream-scarred, stubbornly hopping people. It was irreversible. They both knew it. Through the glass doors behind them, standing in the shadows of the living room, Victoria Colton raised her phone and took a photograph. Young Min and Mirabel on the terrace, close, unguarded, their faces turned toward each other in the starlight. She looked at the image on her screen, and she smiled. 1 week later, Mirabel arrived at the estate for her morning shift and found Seo-jun waiting at the side entrance. His face was stone. Not the usual stone. Seo-jun's default expression was somewhere between skeptical and alert. This was different. This was the face of a man executing a duty he didn't enjoy. Mirabel, I need you to come with me to the security office, he said. She followed him without a word, her pulse beginning to climb. In the security office, Seo-jun told her that a piece of jewelry was missing from Mrs. Park's private collection, a sapphire brooch set in platinum, worth $185,000, a piece that had been in the Park family for 3 generations. It had been brought to Scottsdale from the family's home in Pacific Palisades 6 months ago and kept in Mrs. Park's personal safe in the West Wing. Security footage from Tuesday night shows you entering Mrs. Park's wing at 10:47 p.m., Seo-jun said. He turned a monitor toward her. There she was on the screen, walking down the hallway toward the West Wing, carrying folded linens. I was asked to deliver fresh linens, Mirabel said immediately. Someone from the household staff told me Mrs. Park had requested a linen change that evening. Who told you? Daniel. He said he got the request through the internal system. Seo-jun made a note. Daniel denies making that request, and the linen inventory shows no order was placed. Mirabel felt the floor tilt beneath her. I'm telling you what happened. He came to me in the service corridor and said, Mirabel, Seo-jun's voice wasn't unkind, but it was final. Mr. Park is in San Francisco. I've briefed him. Until we complete the investigation, you are suspended from the property, with pay. She stared at him. 6 months of impeccable work. 6 months of arriving early, staying late, never taking a sick day, never complaining, never crossing a single line on the long list of lines she'd been given on her first day. And she was being walked out like a suspect. Seo-jun escorted her to her car. As she pulled out of the drive, she saw, in her rearview mirror, a white Range Rover parked near the guest entrance. Victoria had arrived the previous evening for what she described to Mrs. Park as a goodwill visit. She brought flowers, imported tea, and conversation. The kind of attentive, culturally respectful attention that Mrs. Park, who was often alone in the Scottsdale house while Young Min worked, quietly craved. Over tea, Victoria mentioned, casually, with the practiced reluctance of someone delivering gossip they wish they didn't have, that she'd looked into Mirabel's background. "I don't want to cause alarm," she said, her brow furrowed with concern. "But I found that she was let go from a previous position under circumstances that were never fully explained. It might be nothing, but with your family's valuables in the house." It was a lie. Mirabel's previous employers had given her a reference so glowing it practically radiated heat. But Mrs. Park didn't verify it. She didn't need to. The seed had been planted in soil that was already prepared, a traditional Korean mother's deep discomfort with her son's growing attachment to a housekeeper, amplified by pride, cultural expectation, and the particular fear of a woman who had watched her husband build everything from nothing and couldn't bear to see it diminished. Mrs. Park ordered the suspension before Young Min could weigh in. Mirabel drove to her apartment in a state of numb disbelief. She sat on her couch and stared at the wall. Then she called Tanya. Her sister listened to the entire story without interrupting, which was unlike Tanya, and therefore a measure of how serious the situation was. When Mirabel finished, the silence on the line was heavy. "Come home, Myra," Tanya said. Her voice was stripped of its usual combativeness. It was just tired and scared. "This is what happens when you get too close to people like that. They'll use you and then they'll blame you and then they'll forget your name. Come home." Mirabel didn't answer. She couldn't, because something inside her knew that leaving would mean Victoria won. It would mean the letter in the suit pocket meant nothing. It would mean the terrace never happened. That night, for the first time in months, Mirabel didn't sing. She lay in bed in the dark, and the silence was so complete it felt like a physical weight on her chest, pressing the music out of her like water from a stone. What Mirabel didn't know, what no one knew yet, was what had happened behind the curtain. 2 nights before the brooch went missing, Victoria had met with Daniel in the parking lot of a grocery store 15 miles from the estate. She'd handed him an envelope containing $20,000 in cash and a set of instructions written on hotel stationery. "The brooch is in the 3rd drawer of the safe. The code is her birthday. She uses the same one for everything." Victoria's voice was calm, almost bored. "Move it to this address." She handed him a slip of paper with the location of a private storage unit in Tempe. "Then tomorrow evening, tell Mirabel that Mrs. Park requested a linen delivery to the West Wing at 10:45. Make sure she walks down that hallway. The camera will do the rest." Daniel had hesitated. What if she won't figure it out. And even if she does, who are they going to believe? The maid or the footage? The camera manipulation was elegant. Daniel had submitted a routine, system check request to the security vendor at precisely the time needed to create a 7-minute gap in the rear entrance camera, the one that would have shown him entering and leaving Mrs. Park's wing. The hallway camera, which captured Mirabel, was left untouched. The result was a surgical illusion. Mirabel approaching the wing, the brooch disappearing, and no other explanation visible on the footage. It was personal, it was precise, and it was designed to do exactly what it did. Young Min's private jet landed in Scottsdale at 11:40 p.m. He had left San Francisco mid-meeting, offering no explanation to the partners seated around a $50 million negotiation table, saying only, "Something requires my attention at home. We'll resume Thursday." Seo-jun met him at the estate. Young Min didn't go to his study. He didn't pour a drink. He didn't ask for a briefing. He walked directly to the security room, sat down at the primary monitoring station and said, "Pull every feed, Every camera, 48 hours, starting from Sunday midnight. I've already reviewed the relevant. Every feed, Seo-jun, all of them. Seo-jun pulled the footage. Youngmin sat in the blue glow of the monitors and watched. He watched the kitchen, the hallways, the entrances, the exterior cameras. He watched at normal speed, then rewound and watched again at half speed. He drank black coffee and did not speak. At 3:17 a.m., he found it. The rear entrance camera covering the service door to Mrs. Park's wing showed a loop. 7 minutes of identical footage, the same shadow pattern, the same ambient light, stitched over a gap that would be invisible to a casual reviewer. But Youngmin had built his company's security division from the ground up. He had personally approved the camera system's specifications. He knew what a clean feed looked like, and he knew what a fabricated one looked like. Someone had triggered a system check to cover their tracks, and the system check had been requested by Daniel. Youngmin stood up. "Get him," he told Seo-jun. Daniel was brought to the security office at 4 a.m., pulled from sleep, wearing a t-shirt and sweatpants, and the expression of a man who had just realized that the easiest money he'd ever made was about to become the most expensive. Youngmin didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He sat across from Daniel and spoke in a voice so calm it was almost gentle, which was somehow more terrifying than any raised voice could have been. "You have one chance," Youngmin said. "Tell me everything. Who, why, where the brooch is. If you lie to me even once, I will make certain that you never work in any capacity in this state again. Not security, not food service, not lawn care. You will be unhireable. And I am not a man who makes promises he doesn't keep." Daniel lasted 4 minutes. He confessed everything. Victoria's parking lot meeting, the cash, the storage unit in Tempe, the camera manipulation. He couldn't meet Youngmin's eyes when he described telling Mirabel to deliver the linens, knowing she was walking into a trap. Youngmin drove to Tempe himself. It was 5 in the morning. The desert was still dark, the mountains black silhouettes against a sky that was just beginning to think about dawn. He opened the storage unit with the code Daniel provided and found the brooch in a velvet pouch inside a lockbox. He held it in his palm for a moment, a small, ancient, beautiful thing, surrounded by metal walls and fluorescent light, displaced from its home by someone who treated other people's lives like chess pieces. He drove back to the estate. He showered, changed, and went to his mother's wing. Mrs. Park was having tea when he entered. She looked up with the composed expression she wore like armor, the face of a woman who had been a seamstress in soul, who had married a man with nothing and helped him build everything, and who had learned that showing emotion was a luxury that survival rarely afforded. Youngmin placed the brooch on the table between them. "Victoria bribed a member of our staff to steal this and frame Mirabel," he said. His voice was even. Daniel confessed. The security footage was manipulated. Everything Victoria told you about Mirabel's background was a lie. Mrs. Park looked at the brooch. She didn't touch it. "Mirabel has worked in this house for 6 months without a single incident," Youngmin continued. "She has been professional, dignified, and honest in every moment. She was humiliated and removed from our home because you took the word of a woman who tried to destroy our family's business over the woman who has done nothing but treat our home with respect." He paused. The next words cost him something, and she could see it. "Iyama, I'm not going to tell you how to feel about Mirabel. I'm not going to ask your permission, but I am going to tell you that she deserves an apology, and so do I." Mrs. Park's hands were still around her teacup. Her face was unreadable, but something moved behind her eyes, not agreement, not yet, but the first crack in a wall that had been built from tradition, fear, and pride. Youngmin left his mother's wing and drove to Mirabel's apartment. She opened the door on the second knock. She was in a sweatshirt and jeans, her locks pulled back, her eyes carrying the evidence of tears she would deny if asked. The apartment behind her was small and clean, filled with plants and books and a keyboard pushed against the wall. "The brooch was found," he said. "Daniel confessed. Victoria paid him to steal it and set you up. You've been cleared completely." Mirabel leaned against the doorframe. She didn't cry. She didn't collapse with relief. She absorbed the information the way she absorbed everything, steadily, with dignity, processing it through a body that had learned to keep standing no matter what tried to knock it down. "Your mother," she asked. "I told her everything. She knows." A silence. "Mirabelle," his voice changed. The professional register fell away and something raw came through, something that sounded like a man stepping off a ledge. "I should have given you that letter the day I wrote it, not hidden it in a suit pocket like a man who was afraid of his own feelings. I've been a coward about this. About you. I'm not going to be one anymore." She looked at him standing in the hallway of her apartment building. This man who ran a $2.3 billion empire and couldn't negotiate his way out of the way he felt about her. This man who had flown home from San Francisco, watched 48 hours of security footage through the night, confronted his own mother, and driven across town at 7 in the morning to stand at her door and say what he should have said months ago. "You fired a man for recording my voice without permission," she said quietly. "You flew back from San Francisco to watch 48 hours of footage. You stood up to your own mother." She paused. "You were never a coward." He looked at her. She looked at him. The hallway was narrow and poorly lit and smelled like someone else's cooking, and it was the least romantic setting imaginable, and neither of them cared. He reached for her hand. She took it. His fingers closed around hers, and the contact was electric and quiet at the same time, like a circuit completing, like a song resolving to its tonic chord after a long and wandering journey through dissonance. Then her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. An unknown number. A text message containing a screenshot of a tabloid article draft. The headline, "Park Empire Air's Secret Affair with the Help, Photos Inside." The photo was from the terrace. 2 figures in starlight, close, unguarded. Victoria's photo. The message below the screenshot read, "Publishing in 12 hours. Comment." Mirabelle showed the screen to Young Min. He read it. His jaw tightened. And for the first time, she saw anger, real anger, not the controlled displeasure she'd witnessed before, but something hot and deep that he kept locked behind his eyes like fire behind glass. "She sent this to the press," he said. It wasn't a question. "What do we do?" Mirabelle asked. He looked at her. "We don't hide." The story dropped at 8 a.m. Park Empire Air's Secret Affair with the Help, Photos Inside. It ran on a mid-tier gossip site first, then was picked up within hours by entertainment blogs, Twitter aggregators, Instagram gossip pages, and 2 cable news segments that framed it as a cultural conversation. The framing was vicious in its efficiency. The terrace photo was cropped and filtered to maximize intimacy. The copy used words like billionaire heir, household staff, power imbalance. Mirabelle's name was published. Her apartment complex was identified by neighborhood. Her lack of social media presence was framed as suspicious rather than private. The comment sections became war zones. Some people romanticized the story. Others tore Mirabelle apart with a cruelty that was breathtaking in its casualness. Racial undertones didn't stay undertones for long. They surfaced, explicit and ugly, in threads that Mirabelle made the mistake of reading before Tanya called and told her to put the phone down. "Stop reading that garbage," Tanya said, her voice cracking. "Those people don't know you. They've never met you. They're performing for strangers on the internet and you are not their stage." Young Min's PR team mobilized within hours. His communications director, a sharp woman named Christine who had managed crises for 2 Fortune 500 CEOs before joining Park Industries, sat in his office and laid out the options. Option 1, we release a statement saying the photo was taken out of context and that Ms. Adkins is a valued employee. We reframe it as a privacy violation, which it is. We threaten legal action against the outlet. The story dies in 48 hours. "And Mirabelle?" Young Min asked. Christine hesitated. "In this scenario, the narrative is that there's nothing between you, that she's staff and you're her employer and the photo was misleading. So the narrative is a lie. The narrative is strategic." "It's a lie, Christine." She looked at him carefully. "Option 2 is harder." "Tell me option 2. You confirm the relationship publicly. You own it. You make a statement that's direct and unambiguous. The risk is significant. Business partners, investors, your mother's social circle, the Korean-American business community. Some of them will support you. Some won't. And Mirabel, in option 2. In option 2, she's not a rumor. She's your choice, made publicly. That changes everything for her, good and bad. Young Min called Mirabel. He told her both options. He told her he would follow her lead. Whatever she wanted, he would do. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I spent my whole life being invisible, Young Min being good at being unseen, and I was okay with that when it was my choice. A pause. But I'm not going to be invisible because someone else decided I should be ashamed. If you're going to say something, say the truth. I can handle the truth. I can't handle being hidden. Young Min called the press event for 2 p.m. at Park Industries headquarters in Paradise Valley. The building was a masterpiece of modern architecture, all glass and steel and desert light, and the press room filled quickly with cameras, microphones, and reporters who had been expecting the careful, sanitized language of corporate damage control. What they got was a man in a dark suit standing at a podium, looking directly into the cameras, and speaking as though the room contained one person. You've seen the headlines today, he said. I'm here to address them directly because I don't believe in letting other people write my story. He paused. The room was silent. Mirabel Adkins is not a scandal. She is not a headline. She is not the help. She is a woman of extraordinary talent, integrity, and character. She is someone I care about deeply, and I will not participate in any narrative that suggests she should be hidden, diminished, or ashamed. He looked at the cameras with the steady, unyielding gaze of a man who had sat across from hostile negotiators in boardrooms on 3 continents and never blinked first. The photograph that was published was taken without our knowledge or consent. The person who took it did so as part of a deliberate campaign to harm Ms. Adkins and to damage my family. That matter is being handled privately and legally. That is all I will say about it. He stepped back from the podium. No questions, no further comment. He walked out of the room. The clip went viral within the hour. Within 3 hours, it had been viewed 8 million times. The discourse shifted, not entirely, because the internet is not a place where shifts are ever complete, but significantly. His directness, his refusal to equivocate, his use of Mirabel's full name and his public declaration of her value as a person rather than a category, these things landed. They landed hard. And then something else happened. The original TikTok of Mirabel singing resurfaced. Someone reposted it alongside the press conference clip. A major R&B artist with 22 million followers shared both with the caption, "Protect this woman and her voice at all costs." The juxtaposition, the singing, the scandal, the defense, created a narrative that the internet, for once, decided to treat with something approaching tenderness. Gavin Pryor called Mirabel that afternoon. "The offer stands," he said. "I told you I don't care about tabloids. I care about that voice. Whenever you're ready, the studio is waiting." Mirabel sat in her apartment, watching the world rearrange itself around her, and called Tanya. Her sister had been watching all of it from Houston. The tabloid, the press conference, the viral clips, the comment sections that had become, improbably, more kind than cruel. Tanya, who trusted no one easily, who had built a fortress of skepticism around her heart since their mother died, who had told Mirabel 100 times to come home, to stop reaching for things that would only hurt her, Tanya said this. "That man stood in front of cameras and chose you over his reputation, Myra, over his business, over everything." Her voice broke. "Baby, I don't trust easy, you know that, but I trust that." Mirabel pressed the phone against her ear and cried. Victoria's reckoning came quietly, which was fitting, because the most devastating consequences usually do. Seo-jun flew to Atherton personally. He delivered a sealed envelope to Victoria's father, Harrison Colton, at his office in a glass tower on Sand Hill Road. Inside was a dossier. Daniel's signed confession, the financial trail of payments traced through a shell account, the metadata from the leaked tabloid photo matched to Victoria's phone, and a time-stamped record of her communications with the gossip outlet's editor. Youngmin included a personal note. It read, "I'm sending this to you rather than to the press because, despite everything, I believe family matters should be handled by families. What you do with this information is your choice. But if your daughter contacts me, my family, or Mirabelle Adkins in any capacity, ever again, my next communication will not be private." Harrison Colton called his daughter within the hour. The conversation lasted 11 minutes. Victoria emerged from it with the understanding that her father's support, financial, social, reputational, was no longer unconditional. The fallout within the Colton family was swift, severe, and invisible to the outside world. Victoria was not publicly humiliated. She was simply rendered powerless. For a woman who had built her entire identity on influence and access, it was a fate worse than exposure. She disappeared from the social circuit. She deactivated her public accounts. She became, for the first time in her adult life, someone no one was paying attention to. 3 months later, Mirabelle stood in a recording booth at Monarch Studios in Beverly Hills, headphones around her neck, looking at Gavin Pryor through the glass. "One more take on the bridge," Gavin said through the talkback mic. "You've got it, just let it breathe." She nodded. She closed her eyes. She sang. The song was called East Wing. It was the title track of her debut EP, 7 songs, all written by her, all recorded in a 3-week burst of creativity that felt less like work and more like exhaling after holding her breath for 6 years. The EP was named after the part of the house where she used to sing when she thought no one was listening. Every track was personal, every lyric earned. There was a song about her mother called Last Morning. There was a song about invisibility called Service Entrance. There was a song about being seen, truly seen, by one person in a world that preferred you blurred. She called it Terrace. There was a gospel-inflected track called 72 Degrees that started soft and ended with her voice climbing to a place that made the recording engineer set down his coffee and stare. The lead single, Hidden in the Pocket, had been released 2 weeks ago. It was streaming massively. Not because of the tabloid story, though that had given her an audience. Because the song was undeniable. Because her voice did something to people that algorithms couldn't quantify and marketing couldn't manufacture. It made them feel found. She'd been featured on morning shows, music podcasts, a profile in a major magazine that focused on her talent and her journey rather than the sensationalism, because she'd chosen the interviewer carefully and spoken with a candor that left no room for distortion. People loved her not just for her voice, but for her warmth, her directness, her refusal to perform gratitude for being discovered, when she'd been singing her whole life and the world had simply decided, belatedly, to pay attention. She was no longer a housekeeper. She had resigned from the position at the Park Estate 4 weeks after the press conference, and she had done it on her own terms. "I need to stand next to you," she'd told Youngmin, "not behind you. Not in your house wearing your uniform, being paid your salary. I need to come to you as myself, with my own name, my own work, my own ground beneath my feet. Otherwise, every person who called me a gold digger or a charity case or whatever else, they'd be right. And I won't give them that." He'd understood. Not happily. Not easily. Understanding cost him something, because it meant letting her go from the one place where he could see her every day. But he respected it, because respecting what Mirabelle needed was the only language of love she trusted, and he was learning to speak it fluently. They were together, not in a performative, headline-generating, red carpet way, in a real way. The kind of way that looks, from the outside, almost ordinary phone calls that lasted until someone fell asleep, weekend flights between cities, arguments about whose turn it was to choose the restaurant, the slow accumulation of someone else's belongings in your bathroom, the quiet revolution of making room in your life for another person without dismantling who you are. Youngmin flew to Los Angeles on weekends. He sat in the back of the studio during her sessions, reading contracts on his laptop, saying nothing, listening to everything. He learned which songs made her cry during playback and kept tissues in his jacket pocket on those days, sliding the packet across the console without comment. Mirabelle visited the Scottsdale estate on her weeks off. It felt different now. She walked through the front door. She didn't sign in or sign out. She played the piano in the living room whenever she wanted, and she sang at full volume, and the house, That beautiful, austere monument to a man who'd worked himself to death, filled with sound, and became, for the first time, a place where someone lived rather than performed. Mrs. Park invited Mirabel to dinner on a Thursday evening, just the two of them. Young Min was in Seoul on business, and Mirabel suspected that was deliberate, that his mother had waited for his absence so the conversation could happen without the pressure of his presence. The dining room was set for two. The food was Korean, dishes that Mrs. Park had prepared herself, not the estate's chef. Kimchi jjigae, japchae, perfectly steamed rice, banchan arranged with the geometric precision that Mirabel recognized as its own form of care. The gesture was not lost on her. They ate in near silence at first. Mrs. Park's composure was immaculate, as always her posture, her movements, the controlled elegance of a woman who had turned self-discipline into an art form. But Mirabel had learned. From 6 months in this house, that surfaces in the Park family were not the whole story. Between courses, Mrs. Park stood and retrieved something from a side table. She returned with an old photograph, its edges soft with handling, and placed it in front of Mirabel. The photo showed a young Korean woman, early 20s, sitting at a sewing machine in a small, cluttered workshop. Her hair was pulled back. Her expression was focused, tired, and fierce. She was beautiful in the way that working women are beautiful, not despite the labor but through it. "This was me," Mrs. Park said, "in Yongsan, before I married Young Min's father." She looked at the photograph with an expression Mirabel had never seen on her before, something tender and complicated, grief and pride woven so tightly together they were indistinguishable. "I was a seamstress. I made clothes for women who never looked at my face. I was very good, and I was very invisible." She looked at Mirabel. "People looked at me the way they looked at you. I forgot that." Her voice thinned slightly. "I should not have forgotten." It was not a grand apology. It was not a performance of remorse. It was something rarer and more honest, an admission from a proud woman that pride had made her cruel, and that cruelty had a cost she was willing to name. Mirabel looked at the photograph. She looked at Mrs. Park, and she said, with the grace that was as natural to her as breathing, "Thank you for showing me this, and thank you for dinner." They finished the meal. When Mirabel left, Mrs. Park walked her to the door. At the threshold, the older woman paused and said, in Korean-accented English that carried the weight of every word she'd ever had to learn in a language that wasn't her own, "My son is different because of you. Better. I see it." Mirabel nodded. "He was already good, Mrs. Park. He just didn't have anyone telling him." The EP release event was held at a venue in West Hollywood. Intimate, warm, the kind of room where sound matters more than spectacle. 200 guests. Exposed brick, amber lighting, a stage with nothing on it but a microphone, a piano, and a stool. Seo Jun arrived 40 minutes before doors opened. He was in a dark suit, his usual expression of professional suspicion softened by something that might, under laboratory conditions, be identified as sentiment. He carried a rare bottle of soju and a card in a plain envelope. He found Mirabel backstage. She was in a deep green dress, her locks down, her hands steady despite the magnitude of the moment. He handed her the bottle and the card. "What's this?" she asked. "Open the card." She did. Inside, in handwriting that was surprisingly neat for a man whose primary skills involved threat assessment and close-quarters combat, Seo Jun had written, "I was wrong. You're good for him." Mirabel looked up. Seo Jun's face was doing something complicated. The internal battle of a man who considered vulnerability, a tactical weakness being fought against the reality that he genuinely liked this woman and was genuinely glad his best friend had found her. "Thank you, Seo Jun," she said. "Don't make me regret writing that," he said, and almost smiled. Tanya flew in from Houston that afternoon. Mirabel picked her up at Lax and watched her sister walk through the arrivals gate like she owned the airport. A nurse's posture, a nurse's authority, a carry-on bag, and a facial expression that dared Lowe's angels to try anything. They held each other for a long time in the terminal. "I can't believe my baby sister has an EP," Tanya said into Mirabel's shoulder. "I literally cannot believe it. Mom is, she stopped, swallowed, started again. Mom would be losing her mind right now. I know. She'd be telling everyone. The mailman, the pharmacist, random people in the grocery store. She'd have flyers printed. Mirabel laughed. It was the kind of laugh that lives next to tears, close enough to touch. The show was extraordinary. Mirabel walked onto the stage to an audience that included industry people, journalists, friends she'd made in L.A., young men's business associates who had come out of genuine curiosity, and a small collection of people who had found her through TikTok and followed her journey with the passionate investment of strangers who had decided she mattered to them. She sat at the piano. The room went quiet. "This EP is called East Wing," she said into the microphone. Her voice was steady. "It's named after a hallway in a house where I used to work. I sang there every morning because I thought no one was listening." She paused. "It turns out someone was, and his listening changed my life. But the truth is, I've been singing my whole life. My mother taught me that your voice is the thing no one can take from you, even when they take everything else." She was right. She played. She sang. 7 songs, performed live with a piano and nothing else, and the room was so still between songs that you could hear the candles breathing on the tables. Tanya sat in the 3rd row and cried without restraint or apology, the way you cry when someone you love becomes the thing you always knew they could be. Young Min stood in the back, near the door, where he could see the whole room. He didn't sit. He watched Mirabel the way he'd watched her from the mezzanine months ago, with the focused attention of a man who understood that some things are too important to witness casually. But unlike that night, he wasn't hiding. He was here, in the room, exactly where he'd asked to be. After the show, the room erupted. People crowded the stage. Gavin Pryor pumped his fist like a man who had just won a bet he'd staked his career on. Journalists requested interviews. Tanya pushed through the crowd and hugged Mirabel so hard she lifted her off the ground. "Mom would have been in the front row," Tanya whispered. Mirabel held her sister tight. "She is," she said. Later that night, when the venue was empty and the equipment was being packed and the last guests had gone, Mirabel and Young Min stood on the rooftop of his Beverly Hills hotel. The city spread below them in every direction, a galaxy of light, restless and glittering, 10 million lives happening simultaneously beneath them. The air was cool, the kind of cool that Los Angeles offers only at night, only at elevation, only when the day's heat has fully surrendered. Young Min reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She recognized it immediately, the same cotton blend stationery, the same sharp folds, the same weight in his hand. "I rewrote it," he said. She took it, she unfolded it, and she read. "Mirabel, I wrote the first letter because I was afraid to speak. I'm writing this one because I'm not afraid anymore. You didn't just change my house. You changed me. Every room I walk into, I'm listening for your voice. Every silence, I'm waiting for your song. I don't want to listen from the hallway anymore. I want to be in the room, with you, for as long as you'll let me." She looked up from the letter. Her eyes were glistening. The city glowed behind her, and she was more luminous than any of it. "You know," she said, "for a man who runs a billion-dollar empire, you're really bad at just saying, 'I love you.'" Something happened to his face. The mask, the steel, the composure, the fortress of control and discipline that he had built around himself since his father died in an empty office at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday night, it cracked. Not dramatically, not with fanfare. It simply opened the way a door opens when someone on the other side has finally said the right name. He almost smiled. Almost. The corner of his mouth moved, and his eyes changed, and Mirabel saw the man behind the empire, the boy who had lost his father, the son who had carried a family's legacy like an anchor, the man who had written a love letter and hidden it in a suit pocket because he was terrified of what would happen if the one person he wanted to read it actually did. "I love you, Mirabel," he said. Simply, quietly, like a fact he had known for a long time, spoken aloud for the first time in the only voice that mattered. She kissed him, on a rooftop in Beverly Hills, above a city that never sleeps under a sky that was, for once, clear enough to show its stars. She kissed him and he kissed her back, and his hand found the curve of her waist and her hand found the back of his neck, and the letter fluttered in the breeze between them, held loosely in her other hand, because she was never letting go of it. Below them, the city hummed. Somewhere, a song was playing. And for the first time in a very long time, both of them felt like they were exactly where they were supposed to be. Not hidden, not performing, not invisible. Just two people, standing in the same room, listening.